Different options is you can literally go from the beginning of the yahrzeit by the night, and then later at night to another Suda, and after Shachris to another Suda. This year there won't be Sudas in the afternoon, but throughout Shabbos there'll be things happening in honor of the Rebbe's yahrzeit. And the Rebbe had Rachmanus on me, and I heard that there's a shul over here, and Rebbe Baruch, invited me to come to this Sukka. So again, one of the things where I see that the Rebbeinu Shalom didn't forget about me. So I'm coming here more as to get chizik also. And we'll sit together and we'll talk. The Rebbe has so many facets. The Rebbe has so many facets. It's one of the things that, I wasn't planning on speaking about this, but maybe this is good. People ask, what is Breslov policy about this or about that or about the other? So I always like to say a story that they say about Reb Aaron Leib Ziegelman. Reb Aaron Leib Ziegelman was one of the leading Breslover leaders in Poland before World War II. In Poland, the Rebbe was, like now, it's happening in a certain way throughout the world, but then in Poland it was like a fire. The Rebbe started with the Itzikul Otzbarska. There was one person, and he drew in the Yitzhak Breiter and so on until it became literally like a fire that was taking over Poland. What Breslovers said was that if not for the war, who knows if the whole of Poland wouldn't have become Breslovers. But one of the leading leaders at that time was Reb Aaron Leib Ziegelman. And at that time also, like nowadays, there was always different political things going on. And there was a move to put religious Jews into the Polish Sejm, into the Polish Senate. And there was the Ger Chassidim felt that this was important. That this somebody should be there. There were other Chassidim that felt that it's the Jews have to keep a low profile in Golos. So they came the day of the elections. They came to Reb Aaron Leib Ziegelman, the Ger Chassidim, and they asked him if they can make an announcement in the Beis Medrash to encourage people to go to the voting. So Reb Aaron Leib said, "You don't have to make the announcement. I'll make the announcement." He went over to the bima and he gave a bang on the bima and he said in Yiddish, "Der was halt as a darf gehen kleiben soll gehen kleiben." The one that holds that he has to go to vote should go to vote. So that's Breslov policy. Each person has to do what is his emes, and you see how the Rebbe is able to attract. Here we're in a sukkah in Wesley Hills, and people may look one certain way. If you go in Meir Sharm, people will look a different way. If you sit, there's Yishuvim in Eretz Yisrael where you'll see people, look a whole different way, and everybody's equally dedicated to the Rebbe. I said Breslov is the only community in the whole world that when there's elections in Israel, the only community where there'll be signs on the street with rabbis that sign that you mustn't vote, and there'll be signs with rabbis that will sign that you must vote for the Mizrahi party. And I said, and that's not such a chiddush, but the chiddush is that both of those rabbis in Uman will sit down next to each other and have a discussion and talk about and have the same dedication to the Rebbe's principles. They talk about how they want to get close to Hashem, how they want to speak to Hashem. I had once a bacher came over to me, more than once, but once when the bacher came over to me, they heard that there's such a thing, Reb Nachman Tochina and Reb Nachman Cherina, there's Cherina and Tochina, the secret. What is the difference? So I said, look, you're right, there might be a difference, but first let's do everything that they did the same. I'm going to give you 20 things that they did the same. And when you finish doing all the things they did the same, then we'll talk about the things that they did differently. So let's talk about mikveh, let's talk about being early for tefillah, let's talk about his boidedus, let's talk about tzedakah, let's talk about Shabbos, let's talk about Tikkun HaKlali, let's talk about Iskashus HaTzadik, let's talk about the Rebbe's Svarim, let's talk about Chatzos. We have so many things to talk about, and these are real things that Baruch Hashem, Breslov Chassidim can get together to speak about, and that's one of the beautiful things of the Rebbe, and it's one of the things that shows that the Rebbe is beyond. People ask, the famous question. The famous question of saying, how could there be a Rebbe that's not living? Now, I was once sitting by Shal Sudas with Moshe Borstein, and the person that was speaking said that something to the effect that, the Rebbe is already not here 200 years or whatever it is. And before he could finish his sentence, from Moshe Bushton, who was sitting there, he says, the Rebbe is da. The Rebbe is here. Don't say the Rebbe is not here. But how is it that the Rebbe could be here, and we could feel the Rebbe's presence, and we don't find this by other tzaddikim? Rebbe Freimel has a letter about it, the Doinik Shabbos. But the main, we can talk about if it's possible, such a thing, not possible. We find in Medrash, we find different people that had Rebbeim that were not in this world. But the point is that the Rebbe, when we realize that the Rebbe's message, the Rebbe's das, the lesson of the Rebbe, it goes beyond community, it goes beyond specific people, and it goes beyond specific times. The same feeling of yearning to the Rebbeinu Shalom, help me. A person can go into his bodas and he can ask Rebbeinu Shalom, even just for 2, 3, 4 minutes a day, he can say, Rebbeinu Shalom, Heichen ani ba'olam, where am I? Rebbeinu Shalom, please help me find direction in my life. It's the exact same cry that 150 years ago, the tailor behind his seat was crying, in his small little booth. It's the same cry that the stockbroker in Manhattan is, Heichen ani ba'olam, Rebbeinu Shalom, give me direction in my life. It's the exact same cry. Because the das, the Rebbe, the present that the Rebbe gave us was, he totally, I don't know the exact word, saying subjugated. He totally laid himself down on the ground. That his specific situation didn't exist. He didn't care about his specific situation. So he was, for whatever reason, the Rebbeinu Shalom knew that in our generation there's going to be a variation. There's going to be tremendous variation of neshamas. Reb Aaron Stashilia. Reb Aaron Stashilia was a Talmud of the Baal HaTanya. He was a great mind, and he wrote a sefer Shari HaYichud V'Amunah, not to be confused with Shari Yichud V'Amunah. It's the threshold between Kabbalah and Chassidus. It's the deepest Chassidus, and it's almost Kabbalah, or you could say it's Kabbalah and it's almost Chassidus. It's a threshold between Chassidus and Kabbalah. It's called Shari HaYichud V'Amunah. In some editions of Zohar Kodesh, they printed in the back. And the Krauses in Yerushalayim, they printed many Zohar Kodeshes have it printed in the back. We in Breslov, there's a tradition that the Rebbe said, there's a Sikha from the Rebbe, from Nachman, that he said that the Baal Tanya had a Talmud that heard a Torah from him, and 8 years he did his Avodas Hashem al Pi that Torah. For 8 years, we have a tradition that it was Reb Aaron Stashilia. He was a very high and special Talmud of the Baal Tanya. He writes in the Hakdam, in his introduction to Shari Yichud V'Amunah, he writes like this. He writes, why is it, and this is in his time, Talmud of the Baal Tanya. The Baal Tanya passed away, Tov Kuf Ayin Gimel, I believe. You're talking about the beginning of the 1800s, talking about 200 years ago. Passed away just a little bit after the Rebbe passed away. He writes like this. He writes, why is it in our time that we find, I thought that he was talking like about a present-day yeshiva boy, myself, or somebody like that. He says, why is it that we find in these times that one day a person has a tremendous thirst, he wants to daven with kavan, and he says, that's what I must be a person that my avoid in life is davening, and then the next day his avoid is I got to do daf yomi, and then the third day it's I've got to learn more Hasidus, and he says, why is it like, why do we have this tempest in our life? And then bringing, when a person has a family and a person has obligations with parnasa, his confusion can become greater and greater. Where am I going? What is my purpose? And obviously, one of the presence that the Rebbe gave us was bodas to help us deal with this tempest. But the Rebbe Aaron Stashilia writes there, he says that because years ago there were new neshamas, there were neshamas that were pure, and they came down for one specific person. This was a neshama of that midah, of the midah of Torah, of the midah of tefillah, of one specific midah. This was a neshama that was sent down, dafka, he says, to be a working person and to do that tikkun of masu matan. This is a person, and they were all. He says, what happens is, in our generation, we're in the shadow of the Ribnitzer Rebbe. I heard that the Ribnitzer Rebbe said once somebody asked him that he wants a child that has a new neshama. So Ribnitzer Rebbe said, there's two that are left. He said, eins will ich von mir. That's one I would like to hold for myself. So there's not a lot, considering that Baruch Hashem, we've got a few million Jews, and there's one or two of those new neshamas flying around. Maybe we could think of who they might be, special, very special, holy Eden. But most of us are neshamas that have been here and have done much Torah and mitzvahs, and they've been left with one or two things to be misakin. So Rabbi Arshvil says an amazing thing. He says that nowadays our neshamas are not set with one specific mission. We're like, it's not like the guy you bring in when you want to build a home. You bring in an electrician, you bring in a plumber, you bring in, and then after the home is built and after it's finished, you bring in a handyman. The handyman knows a little bit of electricity, a little bit of plumbing. So one day we're a plumber, one day we're an electrician, one day we're fixing the windows. Our neshamas are here to do a bunch of patch-ups. That's why one day we feel like we have to daven, one day we feel like we have to learn. And he says, it's okay. So it was amazing chizuk for me when I read that. He said, it's okay. You do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I used to feel bad. I used to start Masechtas when I was in yeshiva, and then I would move to another Masechta and a different Masechta, and I would say, no. And after I said, you know what? Baruch Hashem, I learned like 10 different Masechtas. But, so our neshamas are very, very, it's hard for them to find their specific place. And at that time, and at that moment, then the Rebbeinu Shalom, it's not by accident, he sent us down, the neshama of Reb Nachman, to give us something amazing. And we know, what do they say? The proof of the pudding is under the crust. Now we don't have to prove anything. I'm amazed always when Reb Nosson writes in his letters, he writes that, save these letters. Was there a time when he had 5 Talmidim? He was a nirdav. He was a person that was considered a crazy person, and anybody who would get close to him, there were big rebbes. And Reb Nosson writes, save my letters. They're very important. They'll be needed l'doros. They'll be needed for generations. Reb Nosson writes that. And there were other big rebbes that their letters have been lost, and Reb Nosson's letters remained. Somehow Reb Nosson knew, even though he didn't see it. We don't need to have the Ruach HaKodesh Reb Nosson had to realize that the Rebbe's words are helping people from every section of Judaism and even non-Jews. There are people. I like to say this over always. Chaim Menachem Kramer from the BRI, he got a question from a non-Jew. The non-Jew said like this. He says, "I follow Rabbi Nachman's philosophy. I read his books. I'm a student of Rabbi Nachman, but I'm not Jewish." That Rabbi Nachman encouraged everybody to come Rosh Hashanah to the kibbutz. Does it include non-Jews? And Rabbi Nachman said this in Chaim Aran. Rabbi Nachman said, "I can be mekarev goyim to Rebbeinu Shalom, but dayei le'eved." He writes in Chaim Aran, "Dayei le'eved is karabi. The Rebbeinu Shalom was only mekarev yidden. I'll only be mekarev yidden." That was what he said. But we see that he was given as a present to us his das, the philosophy. I tell people always that what's the difference between, there's different Hasidus and they're all beautiful. There's they have their minhagim and they have their communities and they have their way of dress. I said, but Breslov, it's not about a certain community. Breslov is a certain philosophy, and that's why it goes beyond. It's beyond community. It's beyond specific things. And that was the present we were giving, being that we have to deal with. And I think, and I'm pretty sure I see here I see here in America, in Yerushalayim, we get to see it also. You literally can never judge a book by its cover nowadays. There's no dress, and nothing means anything, which in a way, I heard that I believe they say that Reb Isaac Kamarna asked Reb Hershel Zidachova, he says, how do I know that I'm not from Klipas Noiga? What does that mean? He says, how do I know? Because Reb Hershel Zidachova commented, he said there were 20-something years that I wasn't sure if my avodah is from Klipas Noiga or from the Kedusha. So Reb Isaac said, how do we know? Klipas Noiga means that maybe I'm doing it for my own benefit. It's not even to serve Hashem. How do I know? Maybe I'm just trying to, be this hot shot and look good by my davening. How do I know that I'm doing it for Hashem? If his Rebbe said that he didn't know, how could I know? And I heard, I don't remember from who, but I don't know what Reb Hershel Zidachova answered him, but I heard from, I forgot it was an Erlich he had said in this generation. He said, in this generation, you don't have to put on tefillin for a show anymore. anybody who's putting on tefillin, he can be sure that he's putting on tefillin for Rebbeinu Shalom. Nowadays, nothing is mechayev anybody. So it has its liability. It has its cons. It has that people don't feel mechuyev to anything, but it has a tremendous pro. Whatever we're doing because we mean Hashem, and that's where in that type of situation is where Reb Nachman comes in, where there's no pattern, there's nothing that's set that's going to hold and be mechayev people. And Reb Nachman came in to show us how we can find Hashem on a higher level, not bound to just because I'm in a certain community, or because I'm in a certain situation, or even because I'm a guy that davens, or because I'm a guy that learns. Just for one thing, because I want to be connected to Hashem. It's just about me and Hashem. It's hisboidedus. It's me and Hashem, and it's like Reb Nosson writes in his tefillah, and Reb Nachman writes in his sefer, that Reb Nachman wanted us to be misboided kol hayom. So what does that mean? That we should be misboided kol hayom? We have to learn. We have to, He gave us a whole schedule of how much to learn. Also, what does that mean, misboided kol hayom? But what it means is that the connection of his boided should be kol hayom. We should be that connection with Hashem. That it's me and Hashem. That echad haya Avram is. That's the present that Rav Nachman gave us, that we could be in such a world, and we can be so connected to Hashem without having the trappings. So the losing of the trappings on the outside, is to repeat myself, it's a challenge. When we had the trappings outside, it helped us, it helped keep us online, but at the same time, it brings us to a higher calling. It tells us, no, you can't do it because of the trappings. Do it because of Hashem. Is that possible for me? Can I go on the derech shetzadikim holchem by? Can I really be a tzaddik of that caliber? And the answer to the Bible says yes, a resounding yes. He says, yes, we can all be that tzaddik. We all are that tzaddik. And Bezos Hashem, the koyach of Reb Nachman, that's with the great das and the great the Yerusha that he left over to us, the Moreshet, the legacy that Reb Nachman left over to us, him, his Sfarim, his Talmidim, the amazing different stories of different people, and different people, how they've come to Breslov. Breslov is something which is happening Keseder. It's something which is alive, and we keep on seeing more and more facets of the Rebbe's philosophy, more and more facets of this way of connecting to Hashem on a higher level when the world has dropped all of its outer trappings. We should be Zeicha Taka to be true Talmidim of Rabbi Nachman.
Thank you.